to go through a real quick overview of this first unit here. So we're going to start out talking about definition. So here we go. So first of all, arguments of definition are subjective. So what that means is that arguments of definition focus on terms that don't just have one dictionary definition, but are in fact determined by each individual. So if we take a look at a word like success, for example, it could be defined in a million different ways. So let's take a quick look at that. So how do we define it? First of all, it's individual and it guides the way that we live our lives. So number one, if we're focused on money, then in the way that we live our lives, we want to look for high-paying careers. We want to have a nice car. We want a nice house. We want to have a lot of status. Move our way up, that kind of thing. If love is more how we define success, then we have a focus on our friends and family. So if we have, a great spouse and we have great kids, and that's how we might define success, that would be different. Also, maybe we would define success as getting to travel all over the world. So now that focus is on adventure. So different definition there too. Or maybe our definition of success is just doing what you love. So in that case, we would focus on jobs that bring personal satisfaction rather than money. So that would be different than the person who defines success as having a lot of money, right? So it can be cultural too. So, for example, an American might define success by money, status, and material wealth. So, nice cars and a nice house and that kind of thing. But if we look at like a monk in Tibet, they might define success as quiet, solitary, daily devotion to God, and kind of they don't care about material wealth at all, right? They don't care about cars and a house and that kind of thing. So, so it can be different for each individual person. Why else are they important? They can also help us question definitions and labels applied to others. So here's an example. In 1996, Congress passed and Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act, which is called DOMA, which defended marriage in federal law in this way. So here they're defining two different terms. So the word marriage means only a legal union between one man and one woman as husband and wife. And the word spouse refers only to a person of the opposite sex who's a husband or a wife. So that's how they defined them then in 1996. But then in 2013, the Supreme Court declared DOMA unconstitutional because they said the majority opinion found that the earlier law, the one that we just looked at here with marriage and spouse, was discriminatory and that it labeled same-sex unions as less worldly than the opinions of others. So this doesn't refer to same-sex marriages at all. And in so doing, in overturning it, the court affirmed that the federal government cannot differentiate between a marriage of heterosexuals and one of homosexuals. So it equalized everything. So, and, so those kind of things are really, really important, right? Because they are determining legislature, they are determining laws, so definition can really have a lot of impact on how people live their lives. Let's keep looking. Also, they can determine what someone or something is or can be, and they can both include and exclude. So let's take a look here. A wolf in Montana is either an endangered species or it isn't. So in that case, we would have to say, okay, so what determines an endangered species? How many is that? Does it mean that we only have a few wolves? Does it mean we have hundreds? Does it mean we have thousands, but there should be millions, right? We have to define endangered species in that case. And then we can say whether a wolf in Montana is endangered or not. Also, if we look at an unsolicited kiss is or is not sexual harassment, in current day, sexual harassment is very hard to define, and almost all jobs these days have employees, watch videos about sexual harassment and that kind of thing. But sexual harassment is hard to define only because it's a lot of gray area in terms of was it unwanted, was it unsolicited, what happened, what was the situation, all that kind of stuff. So defining it in terms of laws and court cases and that kind of thing can be sometimes difficult. Also, another one, screaming at an employee is or is not an act of bullying. So in this case, then we have to define bullying. And there's been a lot of controversy in terms of this as well, where managers are saying, well, if I'm really afraid to even, do anything at the workplace, then my hands are kind of tied. If I can't even raise my voice or discipline an employee or anything, that makes it hard for me to lead. But then employees are saying that, managers need to be kept in check so that there isn't, these kinds of bullying going on. So anyway, that can yeah, that can cause controversies too. And different people have different ideas of what bullying is. Everyone's a little bit different, so that's also sometimes hard to define. Um, a person merits official political refugee status in the United States or doesn't. That's really important too, of course, right? So when we're talking about immigration, we're talking about refugee status, all that kind of stuff. What that means in terms of laws and everything could, really impact a person's life. So those definitions make a very big impact, and they're constantly being revamped and revised to go along with the current times and changes and everything like that. So there's a lot of controversy around this, which is why we get into argument. Again, this is all in terms of, this is an argument class, so we're looking at that. So they can address controversy, though. For example, the controversy over how to define human intelligence. So this can lead to a lot of really interesting argumentative papers and arguments in general. So some people would say that it's measured by tests of verbal and mathematical reasoning, so like the SAT or the IQ. But then other people say that SATs and IQs, those tests are biased, so they're not a good measurement of intelligence. So that, again, it creates controversy. Some define it as the ability to perform specific practical tasks, but then we would have to say, okay, well, what practical tasks and at what level? And at what level do we say this person has intelligence or doesn't? What's the status on that? Some interpret it in emotional terms as a competence in relating to others, but you might have someone who's super, super intelligent in a million different ways, but not especially social, so that kind of would exclude them, right? So some say it's street smarts, but then we have to determine what does street smarts mean. What is that exactly, and how do we determine that a person has street smarts, and how do we equate that to intelligence? So again, you can see all of this it makes for some interesting arguments, but it's just all subjective. It's just in terms of what do we think and how can we defend it. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at. Crucial terms. So crucial political, social, and scientific terms are constantly re-argued and reshaped for the times. So if we look at things like intelligence, like I just said, but also things like justice, what does it mean to get justice for something? And free speech too, that also, of course, we have our Constitution and the right to free speech, but that's caused a lot of controversy in terms of what can people say, what they can't say, how much we want to can we limit what people say, and all of that kind of thing. A good example of that is social media and hate speech and things that people say on social media that they shouldn't, bullying, cyberbullying and that kind of thing. But if we're looking at free speech and that kind of thing, so can social media sites take that off? How do they determine when something needs to be removed? It's just, that creates controversy too. Gender, of course, gender is no longer just female and male. So there is, so that's constantly being revamped as well. And racism too, of course, every different person would probably define this in a different way, and it is a really important and loaded term, right? So it can create a lot of controversy as well. So everybody would probably define racism in different ways depending on their experience, their background, their beliefs, all that kind of thing. Dictionaries are constantly adding to or revising terms like these to fit the times because they reflect the way people use and understand words at a specified time and place. So again, it kind of reflects the times, and that is, and it's important for dictionaries to be constantly revamped in that way because they need to reflect what, the current definition of something is. So it's constantly changing. Kinds of definition. Number one, we have formal definitions. That's just what you find in dictionaries. But again, those can always be changed, and you can petition for changes in dictionaries, or you can add definitions as well. So, and if you look up something in a dictionary, sometimes it'll give you several different definitions. You can add in definitions, you can change definitions, all that kind of stuff. Operational definitions, identify an object or idea by what it does or by what conditions create it. So, for example, like I was talking about before, how do we define sexual harassment? So we have to have really specific guidelines in terms of what constitutes sexual harassment and what doesn't. Or how do we define gender? Again, like I was saying, so that's no longer just male and female. So we have to add, especially like in dictionaries, like I was saying, different definitions of gender. And definitions by example, define a class by listing its individual members. So for example, how do we define classic movies? We would have to say, okay, so what's classic? Does that mean in the last 10 years? Does that mean, from the 1950s? Does that mean from the 1950s to the 80s? Like what's considered classic? Or something like worst natural disasters. What does that mean worst? Does it mean, the most deaths? Does it mean the most destruction? Does it mean, we have to define that too? And something like excessive force, again, what does it mean for it to be excessive? What is too much? What is excessive? So we have to define that as well. So all of those kind of things, really important to define if we're going to be making arguments about these kinds of things. Negative definitions can be really interesting too. We're going to look at a reading in this unit that's going to show you an example of this, and you'll be able to also choose this as a possible essay topic at the end of this unit. But anyway, explain what a person, thing, or concept is by defining what it is not. So this can be effective argument strategy when one wants to counter stereotypes or change expectations. So, basically it's saying, no, the definition of this is not this, which is the stereotype, and then you would redefine it. So, and political groups use this a lot too to define what they are not, to try to, any naysayers or people that might not vote for them, then they want to say, no, we're not this. So they might say something like, we're not radicals, or that kind of thing. So this is a very effective strategy in terms of countering stereotypes and that kind of thing. Definitional claims. So let's take a look at a few of them. Obviously, we won't be writing essays right away. It'll be at the end of the unit, but just to look at some ideas. Number one, a person paid to do public service is not a volunteer. So then we would have to say, why not? And what constitutes being a volunteer? What does that mean? So that could be interesting. Institutional racism can exist, maybe even thrive, in the absence of overt civil rights violations. Institutional racism is something that is constantly being revamped in terms of definition. So that is it's a kind of controversial term, or couple of terms there. Climate change is not the same thing as global warming. In that case, we would have to define both climate change and global warming so that we can show that they're not the same thing. So comparisons also work really well in definitional arguments. Political bias has routinely been practiced by some media outlets. So if we look at something like Fox News, for example, they are known, of course, for having political bias. And then we have to determine, what does that mean, political bias? What is it that they're saying? What are they doing? How do we know it's biased? All that kind of thing. Or something like this, moviegoers shouldn't confuse documentaries with mockumentaries. That would be really important, of course, because mockumentaries are not real, right? But documentaries are. So if people thought they were all one thing or one category, then they might misconstrue a mockumentary as something real and that kind of thing. So anyway, just a few ideas and things that we'll be talking about here. We'll be looking at several different definitional argumentative essays and articles and that kind of thing. You'll also be reading from the book and everything like that. So, but this is just an overview today. And just to give you an idea of why we're using definition in argument, how we can use it, why it's important, all that kind of thing. So I look forward to going through this unit with you guys, and I will talk to you next time.